started?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. So we'll call the meeting to order, and the first item of business is approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, agenda is approved. Article 3 is acknowledge visitors and public comment. I think both the people online are board members, so I don't see the public. So we will move on to approval of the minutes of 12/27/22 meeting. So I will note that I did record it this time, but the last time, for some reason, it didn't record. So I had to transcribe the minutes basically from my chicken scratch. So if you guys saw anything that you thought was important that we talked about, or anything that I didn't include in there, let me know and I can get those plugged in. Otherwise, it at least shows all the actions that the board took.
Yeah, I thought it was adequate.
Yeah, it was fine, Ben. I think the only comment I make is it was 12/27/21, not 22. It says on here. So,
Did somebody really vote against adjournment?
Yep, John did. He does that on occasion.
I keep the group, you know.
You don't have to leave.
Just make it one thing. I would move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right. Minutes are approved. So the main topic for tonight is review and consideration of aquatic weed management RFP. So put together an RFP, kind of based on standard RFPs that we have issued for other things. And then we really dive into the scope of work and proposal content to adjust to this project. So certainly a first draft. This one's kind of hard because we don't know what the plan is going to be, right? So we've had two companies that have had a chance to come and take a look at it, and they've got kind of a head start. They know what's to be done. But this is going to go out to everybody. They have companies that haven't had that opportunity. So really the way the proposal was designed was that to submit the proposals, they're looking to give us kind of a per acre cost for the chemicals and the mechanical harvesting. So if you saw the proposals that aquatic doctors and professional lake management had previously given the River Association, they kind of broke it down and said this chemical is this amount of dollars per acre, so on and so forth. Same thing for mechanical harvesting. Sorry guys, I got a little bit of cough. I promise I don't have COVID. So pricing methodology has to include completion of the project area survey, development of the aquatic weed control program, cost on a per acre basis, of any products that would be anticipated to be applied as part of the program, cost on a per acre basis of mechanical harvesting, should it be included as part of the aquatic weed management program, and then any other costs the respondent believes might be relevant to an eventual aquatic weed management program. So the hope is that the majority of the respondents will have the same chemicals. It seems like there's a pretty broad base of chemicals that you can use for this kind of work, and they'll be able to compare it that way, as opposed for somebody to say, yep, year one, you're going to spend $61,492 and have no idea what that kind of entails for us. So that's the way the proposal was written. The scope of work is pretty basic. We leave the review as open-ended as possible. So the way the process will work is this subcommittee will do the initial evaluation of the RFP responses, and then make a formal recommendation to the township board on which one to accept. So you guys can just do a table review if you want. If you guys want to interview these companies, you can do that as well. We really leave it kind of open-ended, not only what that review process looks like, but what the criteria is as well. We're lucky in the township is that we don't have a minimum bid requirement. So there's some cities, it's written right into their charter that you have to accept the minimum qualified bid for any work. We've come up sometimes where the minimum bid for work that we're looking at is by a contractor we know has a poor reputation or maybe didn't understand the scope of services. So you don't necessarily have to select the lowest bidder. Now that being said, if the lowest bidder is qualified in your eyes, just not minimally qualified, but qualified, we always recommend that the minimum bidder be given the most consideration. So we've got a schedule listed out here. So we're looking at issue request for proposals on January 27th, that's the day after the next board meeting. Proposals would be due February 11th. The week of February 14th, this committee would make their evaluation with a recommendation on or before February 18th. The board would approve the contract on the 23rd, and then the project begins on the 24th. And then the way I set up the RFP was the submission has to be for a 3-year program. So they have to either guarantee the prices for 3 years, or they're gonna have to spell out if there's gonna be an increase in year 2 or year 3. I figured that will give you guys enough time to give a proper evaluation of the company that comes in, decide if you wanted to re-engage them for future work, or if you wanted to put an RFP back out and maybe stuff like that. So that's the kind of the 10-cent version of the RFP. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or take any suggestions.
And it looks like this RFP is pretty much standard that we've been building the township for all the issues.
I'd say out of the,
Gypsy moths and all the other good stuff.
yeah, I'd say out of the 10 pages, there's probably 7 pages that are just boilerplate language that covers the township, so that, you know, the board doesn't have to issue an award if they don't want to. The board's the only entity that can issue the award, you know, the insurance that we require. So those are pretty standard. There's only a couple of areas where we go in and make the changes to apply specifically to this project.
And how many companies do you estimate you will be sending it out to?
So so we need to talk about that. I know there's at least 2 companies I'll be sending it directly to. I'll be looking for recommendations. I've got a question out on the city township managers listserv, asking if anybody else has contractors that they've used. Basically anybody that I hear back, if you guys have any recommendations, I'm more than happy to send that to them directly. The state of Michigan also has an RFP website, so you can put the RFP on the state of Michigan's RFP page, and that usually gets out to a broad range of people as well. So, but I would anticipate at a minimum we'll have 2 responses.
Has the ADA section always used the same company, you know?
They've used 2 different companies. They used to always use I would say probably the biggest company in the state. And then they switched to a different company for a few years. And my understanding is it did not go well, so they switched back to professional league
That's
management.
exactly the info I had also.
Okay.
So I think that's one of the companies.
So I think both of those companies are the 2 that were engaged. I'm not sure if the second company that we had already engaged, is what I should say. I'm not sure if the second company is a company that they weren't happy with. I don't know.
So that's a fair point. I can reach out to Joe and ask him, A, who they use, so we can make sure they get an RFP, and B, maybe they put together a list too of companies they've heard that does the work. So
That would be great, because we could probably engage. I'm sure they've received bids from more than 2 people.
yeah,
So if we can get that information, that would be helpful. I can talk to Dave, because he used to manage that whole program. He started at Dave Hampton years ago.
Yeah.
So I could reach out to him and I'm not involved. He has been involved in the last 2 or 3 years, but I could call him and ask. See if I can get a couple other names.
Is it standard in these to tell them how much money we have to spend?
I questioned that too, if it makes sense to tell them what, I mean, I understand that the whole budget isn't just for that.
yeah.
And they have to understand that we're able to do this because we do have a budget for it.
Yep.
But does that potentially inflate the size of the estimate that come our way?
Works both ways.
Yeah. I think
Works
that,
both ways.
they knowing that there'll be other bidders potentially, they'll probably keep it pretty skinny anyways. I don't expect them to inflate it too much. Competition is a great thing.
Yeah, so I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I'll be honest, most of the time, I lean towards not including it in. The reason I chose to include it in now, and I'm perfectly fine if the committee thinks taking out would be best, was 1, because it was an overall amount of dollars that are available, not what's specific for this project, to give these bidders, you know, the idea that we're serious, right? So if there's a lake management company based in Traverse City, you know, they're not gonna come down here for a $5,000 project, but if they know that there's 3 years of, you know, possibly $50,000, $60,000, they're more likely to bid. The second thing is that we're really looking at a per item bid, right? So again, we're not looking at, hey, what's the dollar amount? Because when we do bids for things like master plans and that kind of stuff, it's really wishy-washy, and you do get people that, you know, bump right up against that number. This is, I don't imagine that somebody's gonna change their cost per acre of a certain chemical based on the level of money we have or not. I mean, a chemical cost is a chemical cost, and I would think that it would be the same anywhere, but I agree with you, and I think there's good arguments for each side.
I think if we had more time to do this first one, Scott, and I would agree that not putting it in is probably better. But since they can get access to the information anyway by just looking on the township's website and finding it all, and if they don't find it there, they'll just send a FOIA, right? So, which they don't have to because it's all public already. I feel like this does show the seriousness of it, because what we really want is action. And they know they're in a competitive situation, and it's all line item anyway.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, this would screw up their other projects that they have going on if they all of a sudden go high or low, right? So I feel like we could do that this time. I agree it's a little odd, but I'm like 60-40
Yeah.
on including it, but it was one of my questions as well.
I thought about it a lot, and I'm comfortable with doing it. I just, at first I was kind of like, oh, wait a minute, is this the right approach? But I agree with your example.
Yeah.
Company.
I
They
will
always
say-
reject their bids too. So,
Right.
go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
I will say that the first draft of this, before I sent it out, did not have that pricing in there. And upon my first review, I decided to add it in, so
Okay.
I was having that same internal dialogue.
It is all public knowledge.
Yep.
I mean, if they want to seek it out,
Right.
I mean, it's different than, you say, hey, come give me an estimate for my driveway, I'm willing to spend 10 grand, the estimate's gonna come in at 10 grand.
Give or take.
Well, and the local companies are aware of this because the River Association had already engaged them to get an idea how to develop the numbers that we asked for. So they know that this is going on because they kind of clued us in as how to,
But those are old numbers.
they are old and they're pre-pandemic.
I just,
Hi, guys. This is Lori Gottlieb. I didn't meet you last time. Sorry, I missed everybody. I might have missed this at the first meeting, but what is the amount that we owe to the township board?
So I'm working on figuring that out. It's gonna be somewhere in that same range that was listed throughout the process. So
Which was
the
what?
I believe it was 5,000 to 10,000 was the range. And it's probably gonna be on the lower end of that because the board made the decision not to charge any of the costs of the rebooting of the SAD to the SAD. So the only cost that'll be taken back from the SAD will be up until when it was approved the first time. The township will eat the rest of the costs after that. So by the next meeting, I should have an updated budget as to how much that would be.
And you plan on taking that out the first year too?
So, that'll be up to the committee to decide, because the committee will have to make the budget recommendation to the board. Of course, I think the board is looking for some of those funds to come out. So, but in the end, it's the committee's responsibility to make that recommendation.
Okay. And then just listening to you talk about, there's two people interested in section, was it 2.1? There's a paragraph in there that says that any communication directed to parties other than the project administrator, it may result in disqualification. So you don't really want any of these us members reaching out to people, do you?
So the idea behind that is just to make sure everybody gets the same information. So we hate for bidders to come in, talk to somebody else that doesn't have the right information, and then submit a bid based on information that wasn't accurate. So what I do is I keep a tally, an Excel spreadsheet of each time a contractor reaches out and the questions they ask, and then I make a determination if the information is robust enough that it needs to be sent out to everybody that's contacted. So every now and then we'll send out an addendum that says, based on a question that was asked by a contractor, please note that blah, 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 blah. So, it's not that I care if they reach out to you guys or not. It's just making sure that we can track that information appropriately and that they get good information.
Oh, okay.
I would, Lori, I would add that, typically in this situation, I would say we're encouraged to provide information up until the point Ben releases it. But at the time Ben releases it, we shouldn't be communicating with these companies. If a company talks to one of us, we should immediately refer them to Ben. That's
Okay.
that's what happens where I work. We say this document and Ben, and that way all of that information is going to one place. So I would refrain from talking to somebody after the date is submitted. Prior to that, or after the date is issued. Prior to that, we can have all the conversations we want, but then it's like a silent period. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, no, at this point, I would probably talk to anyone. I'm very familiar with RFP processes, and I think maybe what you're talking about, had to do with the conversation we had a little while ago about reaching out to people, and that was reaching out to people that know the names of companies that would be interested in this, so that Ben could contact them with this document and say, here, we have a request for proposal, but not for us to actually reach out to the company itself. But just to get contact information for Ben, so we can have more entities responding to that.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, go ahead, someone's on.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, I didn't really say anything there. I think my wipers may have said something.
Okay.
However, I have been kind of waiting for a point to come in here, and that is that the two bids that we received from the CTRA back in September that went to Hazel Rissy, I forwarded that to you, Ben, and then I think to Jeff and Scott, just because they were the only ones I had email addresses for. But I was wondering, did that ever get exploded out to the rest of the members? Have they seen what one of these bids looks like?
Nope, they haven't, but I can send that out. It's not a problem.
I think it's kind of irrelevant at this point.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, they weren't exactly bids, they were just sort of non-binding quotes, but it gives an idea.
Yeah.
Of what we're talking about. But I agree, it's fine to look at it. I had a question for you, Ben, about questions. You sort of answered it a second ago, where you said you'll keep a tally and you'll kind of do that. How come we don't just have a specific period of time where we ask for questions, and then there's a deadline, and we send them out, and it's more of an organized, that's a question. How do you prefer to do it? You're the one who has to field them.
Yeah, yeah.
So I always put it in at the deadline, and use no more questions than the date.
So the answer is, this is the way I've always done it, so that's the way it's in there, but
As long as you're willing to do it.
yeah. So the only thing that concerns me about that, and maybe it shouldn't, but the turnaround is there's not a huge turnaround on this. And we always have bidders that are calling the night before bids are due, asking questions. And, it's always a balance between making sure they have the best information that they have to be able to put in a bid, and making sure you're not giving them an unfair advantage. So I have told a bidder at the 7th hour that I can't answer their question anymore because it's too late and I can't provide that information to the other bidders in a timely manner. But maybe to your point, if we put that question period in there, that'll at least tell them that this is the period of time they have to answer questions.
But let me clarify one other point. Your intention is that if a question comes in from bidder A, bidder B will see the answer to that question, right?
Again, it depends on what the question is, right? So if somebody asks a question that's very clearly in here, like, who should I send the bids to?
Yeah.
I would just reply, yep, they can be emailed to me, and I'm not gonna send that out to everybody. If somebody asked a very detailed question where I was like, yeah, I don't think the bidders are gonna wanna know that information. Answering this question for this bidder provides them an unfair advantage. I email it out to everybody that I had contact information.
Good, thank you. That's good to me.
Intent on
Got a quick question regarding the money going to the township. Let's just say it's 5,000. Is that a one-time thing, or is there going to be yearly?
So the 5,000 is the one time that it took to get through the SAD process, right? So the way the board set it up going forward is the only administrative costs they're going to charge to the SAD is direct costs. So if you guys decide you need a legal opinion on something, and we have to ask our township attorney for a legal opinion, that's going to come out of the SAD because that's a direct cost. Same thing if you guys want to talk to the engineer about something, that's going to come out as a direct cost. They're not doing an administrative charge for my time or other staff time or hosting meetings or anything like that. It's just anything that ends up being a direct cost as a result of the SAD. And I think the original budget that you guys had, draft budget you guys had recommended out, had like, I think $1,000 a year.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't anticipate it to be a very large amount unless you guys took on a huge project that needed a lot of consultation.
Ben, this is Lori again. I've got another question. Just when I read the RFP right off the bat, it asked for general liability coverage and who should be named in this coverage. And of course, the elected officials, the officers, the employees, the boards, the commission authorities, voluntary associations. where do we fall? Are we covered under that? And then what about the 301 property owners? Are they covered since they're funding this?
Yeah, so you guys would be covered under the current language as a committee. That's the standard coverage. I don't think that the 301 residents would be covered, but I also don't think that there's any liability there either, right? So this is essentially just a tax. So if same thing, if the township takes its general fund tax dollars and spends it on something illegal, the residents of the township don't have any liability for that. It's just the township board and the township itself. So I don't think that there's any issue there. I'm more than happy to ask that question. Hopefully Mike wouldn't charge me for it. Just give me a simple yes or no. But if you guys are worried about that, I can certainly look into it.
I have had people ask about that when this whole thing was going on.
The insurance, their liability coverage of the, let's say we hire contractor A. Contractor A's liability coverage should list Cascade Township as an additional insured, isn't that?
But I think what she's asking is, do the individual residents that are members of the SAD need to be listed as covered entities?
Right.
Correct.
You would think it would be like a tax though,
If
because
they-
like, if we're all paying our property tax and a Cascade plow truck, or well, I know we don't have, like, Kent County does it, but a plow truck, God forbid, hits somebody, kills them, the township might get sued, but the taxpayers aren't gonna get sued.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's what Ben's saying, but.
Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't hurt to
they're,
ask.
so they're not working on the individual property owners' property, they're working on the river, which is behind them.
Right. I'm not so much worried about the property. I'm worried because we will be adding chemicals to the thing, and with like the PFAS and everything. And that was quite of a part of the heated debate with where some citizens not wanting chemicals to be added to the river. And we're approving it and suggesting to the board what we think should happen. And all the 301 property owners are paying for it.
Right.
If you guys are getting quick questions for residents, it makes sense to.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't arbitrate that here, but it's a good question, and I think Ben should answer.
I'd be curious what Mike has to say on that.
Now, the individual property owners, I mean, there could be cases, they're working in front of your property. They may be walking on your dock, getting on your property.
Well, they're going to, because they'll put a post, if they spray in front of your property, they generally put a posting at the end of your dock, so.
Yeah, like a little flag or something.
If you live on the river, I hope you have good liability coverage, probably a liability umbrella.
Yes, sir.
People fall
Ask
off
and
the dock,
answer.
and different things can happen, and that's just part of living there.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. We'll get an answer before it goes out.
So good.
Ben, you mentioned earlier the compressed timeline here. When I read it, I was pleased.
Yeah.
Also concerned at the same time. Are we sure we're giving them enough time? I mean, what's an extra week? But then again, what's an extra week? So it's like, if they're capable of responding, they're capable of responding, but it's a quite tight timeline. So what are your thoughts on it? Well, obviously that's your thought, because you put it in.
Yeah. From my perspective, I just thought the quicker we can get the recommendation to the board, the better.
Yeah.
Even dealing with the state and dealing with permitting, even 2 weeks can make a huge difference. So, my idea would be that the board would approve it, and immediately the next day, we would start the project process.
If somebody has a problem, if say the date comes by and nobody's responding, we can always.
Yeah,
put a date up. We want responses, but if we don't get them.
If it was summer and they would need to do more of a visual on the river to the side,
Then we
maybe
can-
more time.
Yeah.
That's impossible right now, right?
Can't really, well, they could walk on the ice.
So this afternoon,
There's still snow on it, so you can see through
they
it.
were skating.
So my take is it's a significant project. So again, we're not asking somebody to bid, $10,000 for a project.
Yeah.
When I was looking at the RFPs that I used, for example, to develop some of the other language, it was $24,000, $10,000, $15,000. They were little lakes, kind of like Blair Lake projects. So I think that the companies are gonna see that this is a big project and they're gonna be a multi-year project. And they're gonna be interested in pushing it forward anyways.
I mean,
Looking
essentially,
at this, it's 2 full weeks.
it's 2 business weeks.
It's 2 business weeks, and, this is the time of year that those companies are focused on this. They're not out in the field, so they should be able to pull resources to deal with that. So I would think that this, as long as we, the township, can keep up with the schedule, I see no reason
Yeah, I don't see any issue.
not to follow it.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions?
And then with the 3-year termination, you're gonna put that in there, Ben? The project concludes,
so-
and that gives us 3 years to evaluate.
So the idea is that if they're doing a good job, 3 years should be enough to evaluate. So we don't have to go back to the board each year to have them to authorize the contract. But typically, each year we'll have an out clause as well. So at the end of the program, end of the first year, you guys are just like, this company just did not do a good job. We're not gonna go second or third year. We would have the ability to terminate the contract, to start the process over. But if you guys are happy with it, then we can do 3 years and then evaluate if you guys are happy with the contract or not.
Okay,
Not to cause complications here, but I have had RFPs before where it's a 3-year program, and then there's an optional, this municipality did 2 one-year renew options, if the provider was willing to hold the price to, some formula.
Yeah.
But if we were really happy, we could keep them for 2 more years. Do we want to consider something like that, or do we just want to say 3 and we're done, we'll rebid it?
So you wouldn't have to rebid it either, because again, remember that the township we don't have a township charter. So most places in cities are the ones that say, you have to bid this every so often or whatnot.
Okay.
We could come back and after 3 years, you guys could be ecstatic, and you guys could make the recommendation to the township board. Yep, we're ecstatic with their work, they're coming along, we don't want to upset the apple cart, and we're recommending that you bring them on for another 3 years. So you have the ability to do that, even if it's not written specifically in the contract.
Understood. And this is one of these things where I suppose if you had this crystal ball, you wouldn't be sitting in this room, because if you knew what was gonna happen in the next 3 years, right? I mean, prices have been going nuts, and will that collapse? I mean, part of me wanted to actually lock in for longer, but this is such a weird time right now that, like, is a used car gonna be $100,000 tomorrow? I mean,
Yeah, we might.
are we thinking, I mean, because we're essentially saying, I mean, we're not guaranteeing prices anything beyond 2024, really, right? So even if we loved the company, the price could be triple.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, they're probably not willing to commit that far right now anyway, because they don't know their costs.
No, our fertilizer provider called this morning and said it's gone up 60% since October.
Oh, just this year.
Just since October. So this timing of
Lock
this
in
is
my
very
prices right
interesting.
now.
They haven't locked it in already. Yeah.
Okay, so 3 seems like a good.
It can drop.
They may refuse to.
They wanna go-
They may say they only want to commit to 2.
They may want to have the same amount that we do, right?
Yeah.
So they may ask them the final contract to negotiate and say, hey, we want to get out, upon 30 days notice at the end of each program.
Yeah, this is Chuck here. I think that, like the 3 years is probably reasonable because you've got the benefit of saying that, yes, this is continuous work and they would want that, but then they really don't want to make a long-term commitment on a supply chain issue, cost associated with the materials needed. So you're kind of, want to find some sort of sweet spot there.
Chuck, and it makes a good point, because remember when we had these companies come out and look at the river when we were designing SAD initially, the feedback we continued to get was that we should see a cost reduction between the 3rd and 5th year. That in that time frame, we should have enough of a handle on the spread of the weeds and the invasive species that the cost should start to come down. They shouldn't continue to grow. That's the theory. So, that 3 years is probably the right mark.
Do we know how
Yeah,
long?
that's a good point there. As far as the, if they're really doing an excellent job of the weed management, we should be seeing a baseline drop in the amount of weeds. and that should then be cheaper in the long term. So yeah, 3 seems like a fairly reasonable balance of a lot of things.
Certainly wouldn't want it to be less than 3.
Yeah.
No, I think you did a good job.
Yeah, nice job. Thanks for doing it so quick.
No problem. Is there a motion to forward it to the board based on the couple changes that we,
In the review of legal counsel,
the review of legal counsel?
absolutely, I would make that motion.
Second.
Although, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Was that an aye in favor or aye opposed?
Oh, was there more delay there than what I thought? So yeah, that was an aye in favor.
All right, that's good.
Opposed would be a nay, right?
So that brings us to our next article. This is kind of our catch-all of other things that the committee wants to talk about. So I think one of the things we're going to have to do over the next month while the RFP is out is we're going to have to then develop the recommended budget to the township board based on whatever that cost comes back. So I'd like to take the RFP recommendation and the budget to the board at the same time. So at the last meeting, we talked about weeds being the big one. We talked about having a line item for reactive debris removal, just because that was made a promise during the SAD process. And then we talked about there's going to have to be some administrative costs that were used up to the for the process of approving it. Are those really the 3 items that the committee wants to see? Are there other things that you want to see included in the draft budget?
And clarifying, this is a 1-year.
1-year budget.
No, I think that sums it up. I don't think we want to get real lofty with lots of goals in the first year. I think the main focus is this document right here and having a little bit budgeted for, I think somebody brought up if there's some debris or something that became.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about locking up $10,000 between administrative 1-year costs and 5,000 emergency funds. So we put 5,000 in that number actually last time. So that's going to leave us 80. And with the price of chemicals and the first year being the most intense, that doesn't leave much. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean we don't want to do something. We got 15 years.
We knew the first year was good.
First year was going to be pretty intense.
Yeah.
What were the proposals you got for, what was the dollar amount?
They always range between
60 to 70.
70, I think.
And is that multiple treatments per season or?
That was a 1.
But that,
It was for 1 year. I don't remember what it was.
but I mean, do they come out multiple
They
times?
come out twice, if I remember right, but I could be mistaken.
But I don't think that was 2 mechanical harvests. I think the subsequent mechanical harvests were more of a time and material basis. Time.
Do you know what the percentage was, you know, how much of it was mechanical and how much was chemical?
See, this is like. We gotta read those things that Chuck was talking about.
So this is the aquatic doctors one. It doesn't have a dollar amount. So they basically put this proposal together just like we're asking RFP. So it has cost per acre of all the chemicals and then cost per acre of mechanical harvesting. The professional lake management broke it down the same way, but then said they thought for 2022 the cost would be between $35,000 and $55,000, and then it went up slightly each year after that.
These are the original.
No, these are the later river association ones. The original river association ones were from the beginning of the process, which is like 5-7 years ago, when we brought them to the public.
Yeah, those are
in the library. Those are old and kind of dated, so these were refreshed around the time that the SAD was being discussed.
But these do not take into consideration supply chain nuttiness.
No,
Right.
yeah.
So it's gonna be.
These are pre-COVID.
Or labor.
Or during COVID, I guess.
Right, yeah.
Who knows what their labor costs?
I don't think that they really are relative at this point. That's what this document's for, is to give us the real numbers. It should give us an idea of what they look at and what they.
Yes.
Any other conversation topic items you want to address right now?
So if these come back really high, and you talked about that, we're saying $5,000, that can be possibly, some of that can be delayed to the second year or something like that.
So when you're talking about what is legally possible, yeah, you have a whole breadth of stuff. You can say, hey, we're just gonna take that $1,000 a year to pay it off. You could ask the township, say, hey, will you forgive this so we can, sink this money into the river? What you can ask and what the township board is, a wide breadth of items. So I'd say once that comes in, if that's an issue, if we say, hey, the township can contribute to this by waiving those administrative costs, I think the board would at least consider it. But if they come back and it's, $50,000, then, the money is obviously there to do some of that.
I think the residents are counting on us to advocate as strongly as possible.
Yeah.
Whether we get what we want, at least we can say we have.
We do have a board member here.
Well, he's quiet.
But the board very much will support this organization, along with all other residents that have a concern. We have concerned residents about the internet, we've heard from them, we've heard from you guys. And we're here to service you guys. That's what my stance is anyways. So if it comes back where, will we forgive some of it, especially if you're using it? That's probably most likely.
Yeah.
If you want it to be forgiven just to sit on it, probably not so likely. Because we got a couple of people that are pretty good at counting pennies and nickels on the board, so.
That's all right. So if, so what do you think then, does that bring us to our next meeting?
It brings us to our
Well,
next
are we sure? Because you said we needed a budget in the next month. And then we started to just talk about, do we need to do something?
I'm saying.
I want to make sure that wasn't a homework assignment before we skip that.
So it just, I think you were saying, does it bring us to our next item on our agenda, which is discussing these future meeting dates?
Right, but I'm saying, do we have closure on that? You said the budget over the next month.
Oh, yeah. Is there?
I feel like we didn't get closure on that. That's what I mean. You were suggesting.
You said you wanted to present that with the RFP, right, to the board?
Not the RFP, to the results, right?
Oh, the results.
I misheard that.
Yeah. so we-
I heard for the RFP, which is why I thought it was in a hurry.
Yeah, so there's no reason to do the budget beforehand because we don't know what the RFP results.
We won't do this.
So,
All right, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I
Wanna make sure
I was ready to move to Article 7 unless, maybe that-
This Chuck again, if I can just for a quick moment here to break in. When we got those original kind of budgetary quotes and stuff from back in September, there was a lot of internal discussion at the CTRA as to what the heck is an acre of water, or an acre of whatever the unit is that the pricing was on. Some areas that, the strip of weeds along the side, is a kind of a semi-defined length. In other places, it kind of wanders in and out, the whole concept of the acre is very convenient for a pricing standpoint, but it's very kind of inconvenient for determining how many acres do we really have and what's this price, going to be if we try to, cover certain, districts within the, the river area.
it's no different than figuring out the acreage for how many weeds are in a field. They're gonna have to figure out those areas along the shore, long and skinny and regularly shaped, and there's software that'll tell them how many acres that need to be treated. And you could probably even figure out a lot of it from looking at a Google satellite image over the summer months. But that's essentially what they're gonna have to do is figure out the square footages and then do the math.
So the hope is, because we have the same problem with our gypsy moth as well, but our gypsy moth consultant comes back with a GIS shape file, right? So there's, on the map, there's certain shapes, and within that shape, the entire acreage is going to be sprayed. So the idea is, hopefully these companies are technologically advanced enough that they'll be able to come back with a shape file and we'll be able to look at a map on the big screen, see all the different shapes, and be like, yep, that makes sense. No, that doesn't make sense. If it comes back and it's $200,000, we can say, okay, we're going to focus on these other areas this years. But my anticipation, right, wouldn't be that they're just going to go and like randomly spray certain areas. They're going to have a plan with a shape file beforehand to tell us where they're going to treat these, whether it be chemical or mechanical harvesting.
And I'm sure that about their own performance, so that they're kept around, they want to be kept around, so.
Yeah, true.
We
It's
just
easier to
do
get repeat
contract.
business than to create new.
That's cool.
I don't know what they usually do.
I think this is a sizable contract. For our area, this is a sizable contract.
Especially considering it could be for 3 years.
They got 12 miles of shoreline.
Well, if they really do a good job, it could be 15 years.
Right.
You're talking about a lot of money.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
I know this will get a lot of attention, I think.
And they should be able to go even like say on Google Maps and decide or at least estimate where you're gonna need the chemical versus mechanical. Because chemical will be more slower water, I would assume, and the mechanical will probably be out more in the river channel.
Would it be helpful to provide them that drone survey?
So I was just thinking about that.
We have the 2-foot river down drone survey that shows the contour of the
Yeah.
bottom.
I don't think that one is, I think that's a little deceiving because it's a river down.
Well, I know.
But I think we attempted to get a drone survey in the summer, and I'll have to talk to the operator, because if that's the case, maybe we can put it somewhere and give them a link to it. The problem we ran into, I think, is that in some areas, particularly from your house downstream to about my house, is a no-fly zone. And
Except if you're the fire department.
right, but they weren't out there when the weeds were in bloom. They weren't out there
They're out there dropping.
when the weeds were dead. So I'll see if there's something there, because anything we can provide them, obviously gonna help these to be as accurate as possible. But that was from last summer, so.
Perhaps in the future, the fire department for a training exercise might help us in the middle of the summer.
Yeah.
You know, they need opportunities to go out and test their equipment.
They do take their boat out on a regular basis.
Oh, yeah.
training,
Yeah,
so-
run the drill. I'm just saying, maybe that might help.
You know,
Forward.
But I can look into that tomorrow then and follow up with you if there is video of the weeds.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that I'm sure once they're whoever we select, once they're getting ready to do their survey in order to put together a plan, they're gonna want members of this committee to go with them that know the river and can help point out, they're not gonna go blind and,
Sure.
check out 12 miles of river shoreline or however long it is.
We could probably make a map too of the trouble areas, so we know, using the drawdown depth, exactly how far out from the shore the weedy areas are, and we can identify. And maybe that's a supplement an exhibit that should be included as an estimated area, or do you think that's not appropriate to do that?
At this point, just because we have 2 bidders that have already had access to that, even more than just having a map, I really want them to say, just what is it gonna cost to put the plan together, and then developing that plan becomes part of the process.
All right. Understood.
So consider future meeting dates and times. You guys want to meet before the RFP is due?
I don't think that's necessary. Just my opinion.
No.
Ben, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you very clearly. When did you want to meet, or what were you asking?
My question was, does the committee want to meet before the RFPs are due?
Okay. Oh, before they're due.
Yeah, yep.
It's nothing to be done in that time frame.
Do we need to do the budget?
I would say it's gonna be pretty simple, right? So.
Right.
We could probably approve the budget right now. I mean, kind of.
We don't need.
Mine
we need to-
We got $5,000 for administrative, $5,000 for debris cleanup, and the balance goes for the week.
Right.
What I can do is,
RFP results from it.
as long as the RFP results are going to support that, I'll bring a draft budget that has that in it, and then you guys.
Okay, you must have some sort of pro forma document you use for other groups, and we can just fill that in, so. We can do it rapidly then too, I think. Hopefully. So what does that put us then? Look at your timeline there again.
Well, I think that the proposals are due February 11, so we would probably want to meet do we typically meet on
14.
Mondays? Is that when we meet?
So Monday, the 14th is Valentine's Day.
Right.
I don't have anything going on, but if you guys,
That would work out okay for me, Monday the 14th, but.
Like, get y'all.
what's that?
That's boat show week. I got a lot going on.
Yeah, that works fine.
All right, and then my,
Did Lori and Chuck do that?
does that work okay?
It does, yeah. Thank you.
We move in
Okay.
February 13th.
And then my question is, I know we met 5 o'clock last time, 5:30 this time. I have to take my boy to soccer from 4 to 5, so if 5:30 works for you guys, that's best for me. If you want to meet at 5, I'll just give somebody the key and join you a little bit late.
5:30.
Awesome. So we'll plan on February 14th at 5:30, and then I will email out all the RFP responses on that Friday. So we get them at 4. Everybody has to submit an electronic copy. I'll turn around, I'll push out all the electronic copies without comments. I'll review them over the weekend, if you guys have a chance to do, and then we'll start that discussion on Monday.
And if you get questions that come in that you need us to comment on, you'll just ask us, I guess?
All right.
Ben, this Chuck again, just a quick clarification. I kind of looked at some of the material, but I was doing other things at the same time. But as far as that map that's been used, kind of showing there, that's kind of crude and out of date, but if I think it probably serves the intended purpose fine, even though it's not technically, 100% accurate.
The idea was it showed the river length, not necessarily who was in the SAB, so, but I can just clip another one out of Regis.
I'm sure Chuck has several.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one that's been used is one that I put together probably, 5-6 years ago.
All right.
But the township's used it many times.
I think it gets the idea though, that we're going from the dam to 60th Street. So, yeah.
All right. I'll see if I have a more up-to-date one, that's no problem. No public, so no public comment, then I look for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I just.
Unanimous.
There's, looks like, there's something by your foot down there. Oh, it's part of the table.
Thanks for chiming in, guys, appreciate it.
Thank you.
See you in a couple weeks.